So welcome to the Global Discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Today, I'm joined by Ruth Snyder. You're very welcome to the podcast, Ruth. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself to our international audience. So over to you, Ruth.
Thank you, Simon. My name is Ruth L. Snyder, and I put the L in because if you Google Ruth Snyder, you'll come up with an axe murderer who killed her husband. That's not me. I enjoy writing, and I help entrepreneurs write, publish, and profit from their books. And my writing journey started early. I grew up in Southern Africa where my parents were missionaries, and we didn't have any way of interacting with our relatives who were in Canada and the United States except through letters. And so I learned to communicate, and I went to boarding school as well. So then it became important for me to communicate with my parents through letters. And I enjoyed reading and writing. I found it fascinating to go to worlds unknown through the printed word. And that was the way it was through my education, but I never considered becoming an author until I was an adult, when I had children with disabilities and felt that their story needed to be told. So I'm thankful for the many adventures that reading and writing has provided for me, and I'm thankful to be able to help others explore that world.
Well, that's great. Can I ask you a couple of questions about that? So what was it like growing up in that environment, Ruth?
Growing up overseas?
Yeah,
away from
I mean,
relatives?
your only way of communicating, it's very different today because we've got mobile devices.
Right.
We can talk like this anywhere in the world. Whereas growing up as a child, you were limited
Yes,
to
there was
just the
no
written
internet.
word on a piece of paper and hoping it would reach somebody, right?
Right. Yes, there was no internet, and phone calls were very expensive. So we rarely phoned overseas. So, I mean, you spent time with the people that were in front of you, or you communicated through the printed word. And so words were very important. You learned how to express yourself and describe things and bring people into what you were experiencing through your printed word.
And I find it interesting today that with all our digital communications, and I'm a big digital kind of person. I love it all. But there is still something quite magical about receiving a personalized letter from somebody, isn't there?
Especially if it's handwritten, I find.
Yeah, there's something quite nice about that. And I speak to many book authors, people who've written a book, and the ones that stick with me is where they've personally wrote a little note inside the cover to me or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just adds so much. Not that the books aren't great, but there's just something about that personal touch that somebody took the time to communicate in that way in this busy, crazy world that we live in, you know. So let's talk a little bit about the writing then, because you're a writer, you're an editor. I know you've got newsletters and things like that, but how did that begin for you? Was that something that you found easy? Is it something you've had to work on throughout your life? And what do you enjoy about it, Ruth?
So I would say writing probably came easier to me than other people that I've talked with, but that doesn't mean that I haven't had to work at honing my skills. And one of the best ways, well, the way that I actually dove into the whole world of writing professionally was I entered a contest that was Canada-wide, and I won first place in the contest. And I attended my first writing conference. And I remember one of the sessions that I went to, the presenter said, writing is the easy part. And I was like, okay, writing is hard work. So then what's on the other side? And she was just referring to the whole world of publishing, you know, going through the editing process, getting your book formatted, working with all the professionals, and then getting your book out into the world through marketing. So I continued to learn, and I was frustrated because I had at that point 5 children who were ages 1 to 11. I was very busy. I was also on the local school board. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to be a writer, how am I going to squeeze it into my very busy life? But I ended up getting up early in the morning to do my writing because it was important to me. And Twitter became a very important part for me too, because I use that as my mini blog. And every day I would go on and I would share information on there. And it taught me how to communicate even better, because at that point, 144 characters was not a lot of space to communicate. And I guess I did a good job because people started asking me to help them learn how to communicate as well.
Yeah, I forgot that Twitter only increased their characters, didn't they? It wasn't that way for many years. It was very, very limited. Yeah. Um, and you're also a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, and you're helping a lot of these sort of entrepreneurs, or I know you've helped entrepreneurs to write and publish their own books. So what does that process look like? Because you know the adage that everybody has a good book in them, whether you believe that or not. But a lot of people who want to write a book maybe have no idea where to start, but they've got a great story. So what does that process look like for you when you start interacting with somebody, Ruth?
Well, usually I find that people communicate different ways. And so I try to figure out how they best communicate. Some people communicate very effectively in writing, and other people need to tell their story, speak their story. And so finding out what works for somebody, I also encourage people to, I call it a brain dump session. Just setting the timer and writing down everything that comes to your mind. Because often I find that we block what we really want to communicate. That I can't share that, or, oh, I don't know how to express that. But if you just sit down and allow yourself to write down everything that comes to your mind without filtering it, then you're able to work with what's there and come up with something that is more cohesive and put it into an outline form and then actually do the writing.
And you mentioned earlier that when you were writing and you had the children and you're on the school board and it was very, very busy, that you sort of carved out time in your day for dedicated writing early in the morning because it was important to you. Do you sort of advise that, or do you find that people have their own sort of way of working, or is there a way that you try to structure it?
Well, there's a quote that says something to the effect of, I write when I'm inspired, and I'm inspired every morning at 9:00.
Okay,
So it's true that there are times when writing will just flow and it'll be very easy. But if you're going to be writing for any period of time, you're going to have to develop that discipline. And that might look different for different people. I encourage people to find what works for them. Some people are morning people like me, and they don't mind getting up early in the morning. Other people like to stay up late at night, and that's when they get their writing done. Even I talk to busy mothers and I say, I know that you're in your vehicle taking your children to appointments a lot. You have your phone, use your phone, dictate into your phone, and then you can transcribe that later. So if you are really determined to get this story shared, you find a way to do it. And it might look different for different people, but it will work.
And tell me, Ruth, do you advise people that it's going to take a certain amount of time, or do you find each project's completely different?
Again, I think it depends on the person and the project. I participated in a session where we actually wrote the first draft of a book in a weekend. It was very intense. I didn't enjoy the process, but I wanted to try it just to see what it was like. Of course, it was the bare bones of the book, and there's a lot of work to do after the weekend. I have come up with a process that I use with a lot of my clients where we do the first draft in 30 days. And I find that's more reasonable. But for some people, especially if they're dealing with trauma or something that they haven't fully worked through in their mind, they need more time. And so sometimes a year is more what they need.
Understood. Thanks for sharing that insight, Ruth. And you mentioned Twitter, and it would be remiss of me not to mention social audio, because I know that's sort of something that you do and you've got a great community on there. Could you maybe share that for our sort of international audience today, how you're involved on social audio and how that works for you in terms of your overall activities, brand, and reaching out to people?
So I just actually dove into Twitter Spaces last year. I've only been on there for a year, but it's been an amazing year of learning for me. And Keith Keller pulled me in and taught me the ropes. And so we decided to host a weekly space, and we interviewed people. And as you have experienced, interviewing people there's no better way to learn, because you meet a variety of people with a variety of experiences. You learn things that you would never think of yourself. And so it's been a lot of fun. It's also increased the number of followers that I have, and it's provided opportunities. I was asked to present at 2 conferences because of my work on social audio. And so now I'm actually doing a new experiment this year where I'm trying 5 different social audio sites. I'm doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and each day doing a different site and just seeing what works best for me. So I like to explore and learn, and that's what I'm doing this year.
That sounds like an interesting, exciting project. I will look forward to that, Ruth. So look, I want to change gears a little bit. Thanks for sharing all that with our audience today. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about your own ways that you take on board information. Do you read books? Is there a particular genre that you like to read? Do you find yourself reading things online? Do you like white papers, documents, magazines? When you're taking on information or just reading for pleasure, what inspires you? How does that work for you?
So it depends why I'm reading. And you'll see that right away that reading was the first thing that came out of my mouth. I do read a lot of books, and especially for personal growth and development. I read my Bible every day. I read business books. For relaxation, I like to read fiction. Historical fiction is something that I really enjoy, as well as light romance sometimes. And if I watch a movie, those are the genres I tend to watch as well. Biographies, I love learning about people and their lives. I read a few magazines, but not consistently. And when I do my research for my books, it's mostly online because it's so much easier than, I mean, even libraries now, you go, there's not as many books in the library as there used to be. It's mostly online research. So I will read blogs and articles and white papers online.
So you've got the spiritual, the Bible, you've got your business genre, you've got the research that you have to do for various books, etc., and biographies. Yeah, that's a nice sort of broad range of inputs, isn't it? And it is great, I suppose. I think back to college years ago or education years ago, where you had to go to the library, to sort of study and to sort of read the various books that you needed to read. But today, a lot of that now is online, isn't it? It's great from a researcher perspective.
And it's wonderful because I live in a very rural area, so I don't have access to a lot of the things in a city, but I do have access because it's online.
And just one quick question on that, Ruth. So I'm interested because you were talking about the community that you've built up on social audio, and you've got more followers, and you started interviewing people that way. there's obviously people now that you're connected to that you've never met in real life and may not ever meet in real life. How do you think about that from a relationship perspective versus, you know, having a relationship in real life, in person? Are they different? Is it the same? Do you feel as close to those digital friends that you have now? Just interested in your perspective on that.
It is an interesting thing to consider. I think you can get very close to somebody online, but it's not the same as meeting somebody in person. There's two ladies that work very closely with me on social audio, Graciela Moore and Christy Mickelson. And we have never met in person. Christy is in Texas and Graciela is in Florida. And yet we sent each other Christmas cards this year because we felt like there was a friendship, a closeness there. So there is something about developing relationships online, but I think we have to be careful too that we have healthy relationships in person too. I think we can get drawn into being online too much if we're not careful. And so we need both.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. That's great. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you was, obviously on this journey, because, you know, from growing up and writing letters to, you know, having a family of your own, and the chaos and enjoyment that comes from that. When you look back to people that maybe have inspired you or that you've admired or that you've sort of looked up to a little bit, has there been anybody in the writing world, or maybe, you know, back to your childhood, I'm not sure, but people that you would look to and say, do you know what, that was helpful, that person I like?
I am grateful that I have so many mentors in my life. One of my first mentors was a single missionary nurse who lived in the middle of the desert and came to visit us occasionally. And I remember being very frustrated with her because she would sit down with me and look at my writing and she would say, you know, you use this word 3 times in this paragraph. I want you to find a different word to use. But what a wonderful gift she gave me, because I became aware of words that I overused, and I became used to having my work edited, which is sometimes very painful for writers. So that was one person. My parents obviously had a huge influence in my life as well. I love photography because of my dad, and I love writing because of my mom. And through my school years, I had a lot of encouragement from teachers and other adults that I interacted with. And so I feel like I have a very rich heritage and that I need to give to others because I have received so much.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. They're wonderful examples, aren't they? Whether it's photography or the human version of Grammarly software correcting you for not using the different words. I think that's wonderful. I love that. Thanks for sharing those stories with us. And then I suppose building on that, when it comes to advice, you've sort of shared one with, you know, can you pick a different word in that sentence? But has there been any sort of life advice or advice in general that's kind of stuck with you that you said, you know what, I still hold that dear today? Or if not, is there any advice that you want to pass on to our audience?
So as I was thinking about this question, I have something from my past and something present. So from my past, God is very important in my life, and people encouraged me to be a godly person. And C.T. Studd, who was an outstanding cricket player, but also a missionary to China, wrote a poem, "Only one life, it will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last." So that's one thing that I still live by. And now I'm reading a book by Dean Graziosi called Millionaire Success Habits. And he really stresses being genuine, you know, not being ashamed of your weaknesses, not allowing things to sidetrack you. And I was reading about marketing the other day, and they were saying, with AI, content is going to be coming to us through AI, and it's going to be hard to tell what's human and what's AI. However, they said it's more important than ever that you as a person are genuine. So I found a quote by Rob Hill Sr., and he says, being genuine goes a long way. Don't have an agenda or ulterior motives. Just be real with me and true to yourself. Don't try to be perfect. Just be consistent. Honesty, support, and patience. That's all I ask of you. The rest will take care of itself.
That's a great quote. I love that. You talked about some important things there, honesty, being consistent, that's something we don't hear about a lot now, but consistency really does play a part, doesn't it?
It does.
And the genuineness and the authenticness, and maybe, you were kind of touching on there. There's no hidden agenda, just be real, just be genuine. I love that. So thanks very much, Ruth. That's a great quote.
You're welcome.
And when we're recording this at a time where we're kind of, we've got a new year ahead of us. When you look forward and you say, okay, over the next 6 months, the next 12 months, here's what I want to achieve. Here's what I'm focused on. Here's what's taken up my sort of time in my head. Here's what I'm thinking about. What does that look like for you? What are you thinking about? What are you focused on? What are you looking forward to over the next year?
So I'm really excited about this year for many reasons. I have joined with a business partner, and she and I are going to be offering a 30-day challenge for people who want to get a start in writing their books. And our goal is to lead groups of people through this challenge several times this year. So we're looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to diving into the whole world of film. I'm taking a screenwriting course. I was working with a coach, Adam Hoagie, over the last year, and he challenged us to write log lines for film, and then he presented them to a Hollywood producer. And the producer liked all three of my ideas. So I'm excited about exploring that. It's a whole new area, and we'll see what happens.
Wow, that sounds like a very exciting year, Ruth. So continued success, and you'll have to keep me up to speed with how that's going. That sounds very interesting. So look, I really do appreciate you sharing that. And before I wrap up today on this episode, I want to ask you, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience that maybe we haven't touched on today? And also, maybe you could tell us if people want to reach out to you or find out where some of the things that you're involved in are out there on the internet, where's the best place for people to reach you?
As far as last thoughts, one of the things that I've really been challenged lately with is being courageous. We let our fear hold us back way too often. Dean Graziosi talks about the inner villain and the inner hero. And he says, who are you going to feed? Are you going to feed that villain and let that villain hold you back? And that could be trauma from the past. It could be self-doubt. It could be those voices that you hear in your head saying, oh, I'm not good enough. Who's going to listen to me? Or are you going to allow your inner hero to shine and jump into things that you might say, I could never do that? But I think if we would be more courageous, we would find that we are more capable than we ever could give ourselves credit for. So that would be my last thought. And if people want to get in touch with me, my website is ruthlsnyder.com.
Well, listen, Ruth, thanks. That's a lovely point to end on. And if you want to catch up with Ruth L. Snyder, make sure you check her out online. That brings us nicely to the end of this episode with Ruth on the global discussion. So thank you to Ruth. And thank you to everybody who's been watching, listening, to this episode. We'd like you to like, follow, subscribe, do all the normal things you do for podcasts. And hopefully you'll join us back here again for more global discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. So thank you, Ruth. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, Simon.